Hello and welcome to Call to the Workforce. I'm your host, Emily Chipman, and today we're going to be talking to Carly Porter about living the unexpected professional life, including learning how to manage challenging and just professional relationships and what to do when things don't always go perfectly. Carly received her undergraduate degree in vocal pedagogy. She later obtained an MBA focused on organizational behavior in human resources. For about 15 years, Carly has worked in the HR space in well-known companies such as Honeywell and Citibank. During that time, she initially gained broad experience in general HR before specializing in leadership and learning development. While she was at Citibank, she piloted a bespoke career development platform customized for female middle management. She recently joined CAPCO as Associate Director responsible for North American Learning and Development. She, her husband, and her 3 sweet children live in New York City, and in her spare time, she has also volunteered tutoring second-grade students. Carly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So we're going to
That's
jump
very kind.
in. I think you have such perspective that I think is important for everybody. And I think we all have experiences in life where life does not turn out the way we expected. And
Yes.
I think about when we met 20 years ago, we were just getting done with our degrees in college, getting started with our master's programs. Life didn't turn out for either of us the way we had imagined. But as I've thought about it, it really doesn't happen for almost anybody. And I think about
Yeah.
the people that we've seen in the last few years, executives who have been let go
Mm.
for the economy, or people who have a divorce, or there's a child struggling, or they had great plans to go into a particular industry and then that industry is just slammed and overwhelmed and they can't seem to find a spot. So, this is really an experience that we have to deal with our entire life. I would love for you to bring us into your story and share with us. Tell us a little bit about how you have handled the professional and personal journey that did not turn out the way you anticipated.
Yeah, you put that so well. I think that's a theme of life is that we think things will go one way, we plan for one way, we set our hearts on that, and then things end up differently. And then how we react is has plays a big part in our experience, our emotions, our happiness, our confidence. I think there's a lot to learn there. So a little bit about me. I grew up in a suburb of here on the East Coast. I call it a smaller city. I'm sure to people in Salt Lake, they maybe not feel that way, but a suburb of Salt Lake. And I had wonderful parents. My father worked for the church for almost 40 years. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, 6 kids in our family, and my life plan was that I was going to hopefully get married when I was like 19 or 20 and have 8 kids. And I was going to teach voice and piano in my converted garage and do all of the homemaking things that I saw my mom do and other women that I admired.
Yeah.
And I found myself graduating from my undergrad and sort of looking around and thinking, well, okay, now what? Now what do I do
Right.
here? Because so far my plan has not been working. I started working what I call some job and was teaching and performing on the side. And then I had kind of an interesting experience. I was in a very serious car accident and ended up spending about 4 months in a bed at my parents' house, even though I'd moved out, recovering
Wow.
from a broken neck. And I think some of that time that I spent a removed from the world, removed from the drama of dating and unmet expectations and what am I doing with my life, I think was actually a huge blessing. I would say it was a life-changing blessing because I started to reflect on how I might steer my life differently.
Mm,
I was asking myself questions like, what if I was very obsessed with getting married. And I asked myself if I didn't get married for 5 years or 10 years or 15, what would I do with my life?
yeah.
And it was very clear that it was not this. I think I struggled to know how to fulfill sort of the dream of teaching music because and performing like I was having a little bit of some disappointment with on the performing side, and then the only way I'd seen teaching work was somebody doing it in their house, and I'm a young professional with a working a job, and I don't have a house, and I don't have, like, a place, so I didn't know how to make that happen. Do you know what I mean? I was
Yeah.
missing that example, and I'm sure if I had pursued that, I could have pursued that and gone that route and been successful. I have friends who have done that, who are wildly successful, but it wasn't something that I knew how to do. But I think more importantly, I don't think my heart was in it the way I thought
Mm.
it was when I started. And by this time, I'd worked almost 3 years in some job that turned out to be really interesting to see how a business runs, how a nonprofit runs, how a corporation runs, and what are some of the ins and the outs, and what would be interesting jobs that I might want to do if I continued in that vein, right? And the things that
Yeah.
were important to me that I realized was stability, having a steady
Mhm.
income, feeling strongly confident that I could fully support myself. And I felt like a great path to pursue that would be really interesting. I thought I can always teach music. I can always do that at some point. What would be really interesting is to spend some time expanding my experience in the business world, in
Yeah.
doing some of those things.
I love
You
what you're pointing out here, and I don't even know if this is standing out, but this idea of the unexpected life actually was bringing you unexpected joy.
Yeah, yeah. Unexpected joy, but I would say yes. I feel like I did get there, and as I was pursuing it,
Mm.
I felt good about the path that I was going on. So that there was definitely happiness and joy in that.
Yeah.
But it was those unexpected things that led me to the better thing for me. And I think Elder Holland actually has talked about that, about sometimes going down one path and seeing that the end is not what we want
Mhm.
is kind of part of the journey. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Yeah.
so then even if we have to do a little bit of a reverse and then go to the other path, that's part of the journey and that's okay. And so I went back to school because you can't really get very many jobs with a music degree.
Mhm.
And I went to business school and got an MBA, which was intimidating. I'd never taken any business classes. A lot of my classmates were like, "Oh, don't worry about the academics. That's just gravy. Really, what you want to work on is your network and getting a job and blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, I can't even do these academic parts because these are so different and new to me. I felt like accounting was just like this made up math. I'm like, how is this working? How does this work? I don't get this. Anyway, but I learned even more about what kind of opportunities are out there. What are the kind of lifestyles and pursuits that people can take?
Yeah.
One of them was this idea that you can be a faithful disciple of Christ, a religious spiritual person who nurtures her family and friend relationships while also working full time. And that was
Mhm.
a newer concept to me because in my growing up, that was looked on as not as good of a choice as being at home and 100% dedicating yourself to your family. Perhaps having a few outside pursuits, but being a stay-at-home parent and dedicating yourself that way really was
Yeah.
the best use of your time here on earth. And
Yeah.
I began to see other women hearing those stories and seeing that could be an opportunity for me where I could be very happy and fulfilled. I don't know if I had
Mhm.
necessarily made my mind up at that point. I definitely had not, but I was
Yeah.
very much more open to it. Was also more open to the idea of living somewhere besides near my family.
It sounds like this is part of that journey for you of figuring out what's gonna be right for me and my family.
In my mind, my family is the most important, and I'm thinking
Yes.
about them throughout the day. And everything that I do, I think about how it will affect them. But I support them in different ways. I may not be there for every single time that they fall on the playground, but I
Yeah.
have made very sure that someone who loves them and cares about them will always be there for them. I want to emphasize that growing up, there was no inequality that I experienced or perceived between men and women. It was more of, this is the most valuable way that you can support your family is to be at home, right?
Yeah.
And now I don't believe that that is true. When I think there are multiple ways that we can support our families in valuable ways. So let me just talk a little bit about after I had my first child, I
Uh-huh.
was really tortured about, should I go back to work or not? And because of this upbringing and because of this dream I had of being the stay-at-home mom, I that was always weighing on me, but I was also learning and growing so much at work. I was pursuing I was exploring what it might look like if I stayed home versus what would it look like if I did go back to work, and what would the childcare situation be. And we
Right.
ended up hiring this amazing, amazing nanny still works for us over 6 years now.
Uh-huh.
And as I prayed and pondered and researched and talked it over with my husband and dozens of other people, I realized that this was going to be the best choice for me, which was to go to work full time and
Uh-huh.
trust my child with this amazing person and be a co-parent with them and nurture them in many ways, not just be by being there in person. And I had a similar experience after my second of kind of asking, should I stop or should I go
Yeah.
back to work? And being willing to take a step back if I needed to, but
Yeah.
realizing that this was still good for our family. And we continue
Yeah.
to have that conversation, but it continues to feel right. And at this point, my oldest child was recently diagnosed with autism. He's on the spectrum. And I
Uh-huh.
actually truly believe that the best place for him to be is with multiple people who have professional backgrounds in understanding him more
Mhm.
than just me. I am sure
Yeah.
he would always feel loved, but he's understood and loved now.
Oh, I love that. And this is a very unexpected path from what you imagined. I'm curious, as you think about this, what are the top 2 or 3 principles that you would give?
I think you have to first recognize and accept that we are all different. We all have
Yeah.
different talents. We all have different appetites and ways that we feel satisfaction and fulfillment. We all have different dreams. We all have
Yeah.
different support systems around us. We
Mhm.
all have different ways that we manage our mental health, right? All of these things have to come into play. And
Yeah.
so, as you think about how you manage all of these pieces of your life, so you've got that as your background, and then you have to think about what are some of the most important things to you
Mhm.
in your life? What are those top 3 or 4 things? And for me,
Yeah.
it is nurturing my family, having a
Mhm.
family and nurturing them and giving them what they need as much as possible to help them be happy. I recognize
Yeah.
I'm not solely responsible for their happiness, but I want to give them as much as I can for that.
Yeah.
So that's number 1. And 2 is managing my own mental health, my own growth and spiritual and mental journey so that I am growing, I am
Mhm.
learning, I am developing, because I found that the more that I'm doing that, the more I'm able to give to other people. And
Yeah.
when my mental health is suffering or my spiritual or physical health, anything I can do for anybody else is suffering and is
Yeah.
diminished. So
Yeah.
those were really important to me, and that's what led me to that decision. So I would say I'm a very spiritual person. I believe it is between you and God. And if
Yeah.
you are married, between you and God and your spouse, I think you should be joint agreement on that. I mean, listen, we live in a much different world than 40 years ago. Like,
Yeah.
I can be in contact with my son in seconds if I want to, because there are cell phones all around. There are teachers and emails and texts
Yeah.
and all kinds of things, right? Like, we live in a different world, and you can support
Yeah.
your children in many more ways than you could 20, 40, 60 years ago. So those are some things to consider.
As I'm listening to this, it's also causing me to reflect and think there's the courage to step into the path, and then there's also the learning curve. And I'm curious for you. I know for me, I had some learning curve. There was like you switching from music into business. Sometimes we have these experiences where we think, I don't know if my education prepared me for this. One of the big things that comes up when people find out that I'm an executive coach is relationships.
Mm.
It's it is so common, whether it's women who are senior leaders and they have complicated politics, or there are people whose bosses have expectations and it feels challenging, or maybe you're not sure you're getting the expectations right, or you've got peers. It seems to be a big experience for people. And I'm curious for you, did you have a learning curve with it? And what have you learned as you've stepped into this path, not just courageously, but now you're in it?
So a few things come to mind. I think I had to learn what are professional relationships. What do they look like? I hadn't seen that. I
Yeah.
really hadn't seen that
Yeah.
anywhere. I had worked hourly jobs and I had worked different places, but what is a professional relationship when you are on equal footing? And even things as silly as, I don't know if this is silly for some or not, but when I went to business school, I was single and I was
Mhm.
working with a lot of my classmates. Good chunk of them were married, and I didn't even know how to have a working relationship when I was single with a married man. I hadn't even
Yeah.
seen that, right? And that seems like looking like saying that out loud and in hindsight, like that seems so simple, but I think you just have to recognize that you're not going to know how to do everything and that's okay.
Yeah.
I think I would say there's a few things that I think have been helpful for me.
Mm.
What are the greatest commandments? When Jesus Christ is approached by the Pharisees and they say, "What is the greatest commandment?" And he says, "Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart."
Mhm.
And the second is like unto it, love thy neighbor as thyself, right?
Yeah.
Love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, there's definitely work to be done about loving thyself. But what I think we can get out of that is when we when we give people the benefit of the doubt, when we work toward having empathy and trying to put ourselves in their shoes, when we
Mhm.
assume positive intent, we are going to get much farther and we are going to be able to get to levels of understanding that are not possible to reach without that.
Mm. Can you
Um,
give us an example?
yeah, I had a manager years ago who we were going to be traveling to Hong Kong to conduct a training.
Mhm.
And there was some sensitivity around it because the leadership there was a little bit difficult to work with. So we wanted to put on
Mhm.
a really good impression. And understandably, I thought it would be cool if my husband came with me. He obviously wouldn't work with me, but he would come and stay in the hotel room with me and he
Mhm.
could do whatever he wanted during the day.
Yeah.
But it would be fun to take that journey together. And when I suggested that, or when I brought that up to my manager, not necessarily asking for permission, but just suggesting it, she was like, I don't think that's a good idea. We got to make sure that we're on the ball and that you're going to have to work on the weekend before and all of these
Mhm.
things. And I was kind of scratching my head and thinking, but can she even tell me that? Does she even have the ability to tell me that? And I talked to a few friends and I realized a few things. No, she can't. She can't decide who I hang out with and when and where. And I could have left it at that. I could have just gone back to her and said, "You can't tell me what to do. And so I'm going to bring him and you're just going to have to deal with it. And you won't have to deal with it because it's not like he's going to be in the training anyway." I could have left it
Right.
at that. But I also wanted to learn a little bit more about what was causing this for her. And
Mhm.
something that I learned was in the recent past of a few months before this incident was taking place,
Mhm.
she had been working with someone else who they were conducting a similar training in London that also had a lot of
Mhm.
eyes on it. They really had a lot of
Yeah.
pressure under them. And the woman that was helping her had her partner with her, and
Uh-huh.
they left for the weekend to continental Europe. She was going to be back the night before, Sunday night, and then be able to be in early on Monday. And then
Yeah.
she missed her train, and it was
Oh,
the last train out of wherever they were coming from, France or something. And so
right.
she didn't end up arriving until Monday morning, right when the training was started, when she needed to be there like 2 hours ahead of time.
Uh-huh.
Totally understandable mistake. She ended up talking to the boss like 3 levels above this woman, and just it was traumatizing for her.
Yeah.
Now, if I didn't know those things, that could have caused a lot of friction in our relationship going
Yeah.
forward, right? If I had him
Yeah.
come. Or I could have said, "Oh, okay, okay, he's not gonna come." But then I'm
Yeah.
setting up a poor precedent for relationship going forward. I'm not managing the expectations very well going forward.
Yeah.
But because I understood that, I came back to her and I said, I used a little bit of diplomatic language. I said, Josh will be traveling at the same time and staying at the hotel as well, rather than he'll be
Uh-huh.
staying with me. I will be 100% dedicated to everything that is needed for this training. I will work whatever
Mhm.
hours are needed for us to make the impression and pull off what we need to.
Mhm.
That saying those kinds of words, you have to be very careful when you say that, because when we can talk about that another point of managing expectations and setting boundaries. But
Yeah.
at that point, I had the capacity to do that. And so I could say that. And he will not affect my performance in any way. And she
Yeah.
said, well, I really don't think that's a good idea. I'm uncomfortable with that. And I said, I'm sorry to hear that. I'll make sure that I think she wanted me to back down. And I said, I'm
Yeah.
sorry to hear that. We're going to continue with that plan, but I'll be here for whatever changes you want to make. Actually, what happened is we got to Hong Kong and my boss was very sick. She got so sick, she was in the hospital. She went to the hospital for 5 days, and I ended up running the
Wow.
training completely by myself, which was not the plan at all.
Yeah.
My husband was there, and the chief compliance officer and the regional leadership and all of that were there. And we made a good impression, and it ended up being really great.
Mhm.
And even though she was not able to be involved, so not only did I keep my promises, but I exceeded them because she wasn't even there to be involved. I was doing both of our jobs. And that incident actually gave me a lot of confidence moving forward with setting expectations. But I
Mhm.
wouldn't have been able to get there if I hadn't learned more of her story and then
Mhm.
also learned about what are my options and what are my boundaries and what are important to
Mhm.
me. How do I handle this situation so we're both set up for success going forward? I think another principle that's really important is whenever you're having a conversation where you have to deliver a tough message, you want to give the other person an opportunity to save face and come out of the conversation feeling on equal footing,
Yeah.
and that you're not talking down to them, or that they've done something bad, or that they are less than you, that you
Yeah.
continue to have equal stature, right? Helping them save face. I think that's really important.
And how many times have we had egg on our face when we
Yeah.
go into a scenario and we're frustrated and we sit down with them and all of a sudden they're like, I didn't have a choice. My boss required this of me. And we've been frustrated with them without thinking about their situation, right?
Yeah.
So, this idea of giving, I think, a little bit of space, grace and space to allow people to have different perspectives, but also have different circumstances than what we've
Yeah.
anticipated. So, what are the top, if you were to pick the top things, the top principles that people could learn from these experiences, what would you share with women who just say, how do I manage expectations from my boss that may be challenging or building these relationships?
I would say, again, you have to think about what's most important to you, um, and what's important in how you're spending your time. You also need to consider what is the cultural expectations at your company, because those are different. It's not just dependent on culture, or excuse me, country or city, even within the company and even within inside the company. It could be your department or even your team,
Mhm.
right? What are the expectations? And can I meet them, or do I need to adjust them? Thinking about how this might affect you going down the line, but you have to be careful to not do it in a spirit of fear. You have to you have to do it in a way of you can have a measure of objectivity.
Mhm.
And then you have to make that choice of, what do I want to do with that? So I think understanding what's important to you, understanding what is the precedent, what are the expectations where you are, and can you meet them, or do you need to adjust them? How might that affect you going forward? And what would you do to mitigate that? So understanding those two. And then I think the third one is actually the most important, which is to remember that we are all human beings. We are all part of the human family. And I believe we are all children of God.
Yeah.
We all come naked and cold into the world, and we leave it that way. We all
Yeah.
are just simple creatures. And despite this hierarchy that we've built in our culture and all of this complexity, we're just humans. And humans have fears and struggles, and they get tired and they get uncertain and they have baggage. And so try to be understanding of that other person, right? So
Yeah.
you can bring all of that with you into the room and recognize that you are worth whatever. If there is any accommodation or exception or any shifting of things or ways to think about that, if anybody has ever had that, you are worth having it
Yeah.
because you add value. And if you add value, then you are worth preserving and you're worth protecting and making sure that you can continue to add value. So
Hmm.
I think those are the things that you need to go into those difficult conversations or those conversations about boundaries. I think the last principle I will also say is talk to a lot of people. That's really something that has been, I think, the biggest, second to prayer and talking to my husband, is asking other people's advice,
Hmm.
asking other people, and
Yeah.
make sure you're not always asking the same people, right? Or that you're at least getting people that are from different industries, or they're a different gender, or they're a different
Yeah.
generation, or they've had different experiences. They live in a different country, whatever. The I feel like anytime I make any big decision, I'm talking to at least 2 or 3 other people besides just my sisters or my friends or my siblings or my
Yeah.
husband, right?
Yeah.
I think that is also a huge thing.
It's jumped out to me as so important that you're curious what your values are. You've spoken with multiple people to really get different perspectives. You spend time curious, you honor people, and you kept your word and you did your job and you did it well. Because if you do all those things and then you don't show up and you don't keep your word and you don't do it well, you undermine everything that you've done. And so I thought that was really valuable. And with that, I will say, I think one of the challenges we face as women sometimes, and this is probably human beings in general, are the high expectations we have of ourselves.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about some of the women that we've invited to come onto the podcast and the number of women who have said to me, I don't think I have that much of value to share.
Hmm.
And they have so much of value. And and I think sometimes we look at these things and we say, "Oh, I don't know if I'm enough of this or enough of that." And you've worked with so many different people who have different perspectives. And we look at things like neurodiversity that is becoming more and more prevalent. And when you stack all of these things together, I really have started to wonder. I can imagine someone sitting here listening to this and thinking, oh my gosh, Carly, this is great. And also, you have 15 years of experience building it, and they want to be perfect today.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone who wants to be perfect today? And what's the line between expecting yourself to do all of these things perfect versus doing your best?
Yeah. I would say, me too, girl. I want to be perfect today, too. Let me share another sort of interesting facet of my life. When I was a child, I was diagnosed with ADHD. When I was in elementary school, it was pretty well managed. And then junior high, less so, high school, less so, college. And I spent I would say most of my life, I spent believing that I was not as capable. I didn't not as capable as other people, that I
Mhm.
didn't care as much as other people, that I was lazier than them, and that even though I tried to fake it and look as confident, I didn't have as much to offer. I felt like I had talents and I did have things to offer, but that I just couldn't make it happen. And you talk about, you set up these expectations and these boundaries, and then you have to deliver, and then you delivered, and that's great. Well, there's plenty of times I didn't deliver. And I'll get to that in a minute of what you do when that happens. But I spent so much time feeling ashamed of that and feeling that it was because I wasn't trying hard enough and I didn't care enough. This is even with me getting diagnosed at 8 years old and still
Yeah.
knowing this. And I
Yeah.
still felt that way. And I still felt ashamed that if I just tried harder, if I just prayed harder, if I just cared more about people, then I would get there and I could do the things that I feel like are inside me that I could do. And I just continued to have different successes, but also
Yeah.
some failures, you know?
Yeah.
I've been fired from jobs. I've been taken off of projects. Like, I've had plenty of things that didn't go well. I think I think where the turning point for me is when we moved to New York, it was for my husband's job, and I had been struggling professionally, and my mom had recently died, who was very close to. We'd also been struggling with infertility, and so we came here to the city, and now I'm faced with looking for a job, and I just decided that I needed more specialized support. I'd been in therapy, I'd seen a psychiatrist, I'd gotten help in various ways, but it was always just not quite, it's like that shirt that just never quite fits. It's tight on the shoulders, and then you get a different size and it's tight on the waist, and then
Yeah.
the arms are too short. And it just was like, okay, well, I'm clothed, but it's just not comfortable?
Yeah.
That's how it always felt after I've got that help. And then
Yeah.
I was actually reading this book. It's called Driven to Distraction
Mm.
by a psychologist.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, I need a guy like this who specializes in it. And I turned the book over, and it's talking about where he is, and he's in New York. I was like, well, I'm going to go find this guy.
Yeah.
And his practice was actually pretty close to my house. And their entire specialty, every psychologist, every psychiatrist, every coach in there specialized in ADHD. And I remember the first couple of years that I worked with them was about managing my anxiety and my depression, and just feeling that finding that I could really believe that I had value to offer, and that
Yeah.
these were just traits that I have, and that
Yeah.
they have positives and they have negatives. And so
Yeah.
let's work on amplifying the positives and diminishing the negatives, but
Yeah.
recognizing that I have value. And I remember several sessions just leaving and just weeping and crying because I felt for the first time like really understood. And even speaking with other people with ADHD, I didn't have that experience. And we've been in the city now for 10 years. And so I've been on this journey, a very specialized journey for 10 years. And I will say, taking those steps and getting that support, I look at big turning points in my life. And that car accident I told you about, where I decided to go in a different direction, that's a big
Yeah.
one. And the second was starting this treatment and working with these professionals in such a way that it honestly changed my life. It changed my relationships. It changed my relationship with myself. It opened my eyes to what I could accomplish and what I was capable of. And even up until a couple years ago, I think I still was struggling with that, feeling that shame and that trying to hide who I was, and that thing that I was struggling with. You see ramps and elevators for someone
Yeah.
that needs assistance walking and has a wheelchair. And we see braille printed various places for someone that might be vision impaired. But when it comes to neurological disorders, that's often a hidden struggle. It's a hidden
Yeah.
handicap, really.
Yeah.
It's a hidden disability. And so, just pouring myself into that and really taking the time to get that treatment has been just life-changing, and it's been awesome. And I think only in the last year or 2 have I really felt like I have so much to offer. I have so much value, and I just have to help, like, get myself. I stopped focusing so hard on mitigating my weaknesses, and I finally started focusing on building and amplifying my strengths.
I
And
love this.
it's not
Yeah.
that I'm not still trying to work on those, because they do get in the way, but
Yeah.
that was a big mindset shift for me, and I am so thankful for that. And
Yeah.
so I hear some people say, "Well, I don't it's so expensive and it takes so much time to go through that treatment." I would say to anybody in that position, there is nothing that you could spend money on other than maybe your food and keeping your head covered. Don't buy that pair of boots that you really want.
Yeah.
Spend your time and your money and your resources on managing and nurturing your mental health,
Yeah.
because it enables everything else.
It reminds me of being on an airplane where they talk about put your mask on first.
Yes.
Make sure you can breathe.
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of research lately about women and in this 40 to 50-year-old age. And one of the things I learned is that women, as they go through menopause, many of them experience symptoms that actually mimic ADHD,
Yeah.
and they are now actually being treated by, and I will in the show notes try and drop some of the links because this is from clinical people. They're actually now being treated by ADHD medications.
Yeah.
And so I think this story, we could look at this and say, oh, this is only applicable to this one nuanced group. But actually, I think what you've shared of focus on your strength, stop focusing on what feels like a weakness, right? It's probably something we all need to work on as women. If you were to give 2 or 3 tips to say, as you, whether you have ADHD, whether you don't, as you try to let go of perfection, what are 2 or 3 things that would really help women do this?
So one of the things that I one of the aspects of ADHD is that a person with that condition does not learn as easily or as quickly from their mistakes. They
Hmm.
don't respond to that external stimuli. If you feel ashamed because you were late, or if you feel worried because you missed an assignment or whatever it is, right? It takes you longer to learn from that. And how that has, what the result has been for me is that I've had to work harder to get to where I am because I've fallen down more. And how that's actually turned into a strength. I have had multiple managers tell me that they say that I take feedback really, really well, that I own my mistakes,
Mhm.
and I follow up and say, this is what I'm working on and this is what I'm trying to do. And I would say, don't be afraid of feedback and don't be afraid of getting help. You are worth all the effort and all the resources and all the expertise
Mm,
to be your best self. You don't have to
yeah.
be the only person to manage your mental health and mitigating your weakness and any of that. You don't. There are people that are trained in that. There are different support systems that you can get. So stop it. Stop trying to do it by yourself and include God in helping you carry that burden, include professionals, include loved ones, and let them help you. So I think don't stop trying. Just keep working on it. You will get it. You will continue to fall on your face and you will
Mhm.
continue to get back up and don't stop. Like, just keep trying. Another principle is that sometimes we see feedback, or maybe somebody doesn't like a product that we've put out, or they're unhappy with something that we did, or we felt like we fell short, or whatever it is. And I think that I actually teach, when I teach leaders and managers about how to be a good manager, one of the things that I share with them is that when people are perceive that they're getting feedback and that it's something that they did wrong, it actually ignites in them their fight or flight emotions, right? Their fight or
Mhm.
flight. Yeah, that reaction, right?
Yeah.
That sort of base reaction that lizards have and reptiles and all
Yeah.
animals, right?
Yeah.
And why is that? We're not being attacked by a bear.
Yeah.
So find a way to normalize that and take that as, okay, I'm going to be better, and I'm going to learn from that, and I'm probably going to do it again, and I'm probably going to
Yeah.
fail again. And I would say the third thing is you will make mistakes. You will miss deadlines. You will forget a meeting. You will drop the ball. Just just give yourself grace that that's going to happen. And
Mhm.
I can tell you, being a manager and teaching managers and conversing with them a lot, one of the most important things is just communication and resetting expectations. Hey, I've been having several things, this, that, and the other came up, and I'm not going to be able to get you that on Friday, but I believe I'm about 70% done.
Mm.
I think I can get it to you by Wednesday. I think I'll actually be done maybe a little bit earlier, but could we do Wednesday? Would that work? Think through what their concerns might be and try to allay them, but just own it and say, I don't know if it's going to work. I would much
Yeah.
rather somebody tell me on Thursday, hey, I'm not going to get it to you tomorrow, than have them tell me on Friday
Yeah.
afternoon, "Hey, I'm not gonna
Yeah.
get it to you,"
Yeah.
right? Because what that
Exactly.
tells me is, first of all, we're all humans. Of course, we're gonna miss some deadlines. We're not gonna get
Yeah.
things. But if you're smart enough to tell me the day before, that means that you're anticipating your bandwidth, that you're able to think about, planning ahead, and you are managing expectations. And I will appreciate that. I will actually appreciate that you told me it's not going to happen rather than just saying, you messed up and you didn't get it at Friday,
Yeah.
like you said, right? So just own it and then reset the expectations and have that communication. Don't
Right.
hide from it.
I love this example that you've just given, which is so specific of something someone can do when they are not going to meet a deadline. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. As we like to do, Carly, if you were to leave one or two sentences of wisdom or encouragement to another woman, what would you share?
I think I would share one of my favorite quotes. It's from a leader in our church, President Benson, and he says, "Men and women who turn their lives over to God will discover that he can make a lot more out of their lives than they can."
Hmm.
And I have definitely experienced that. And when you continue to point to your North Star, to what's most important to you, you'll continue to get there and in unexpected ways.
To all our listeners, we appreciate you joining us. And if you have found this helpful, we would invite you to share this with other women. Until next time, we hope you're having a great week.